He walked into hell wearing the chains of his own people, and what he saw would haunt him forever. The metal cuffs bit into his wrists, cold and deliberate. Ibrahim Traoré kept his head low, the hood of a tattered sweatshirt casting shadows over his face. The guards barked orders, shoving him forward through the rusted gates of Ouagadougou Central Prison. No one recognized him. Not the warden, not the guards, not the inmates who watched from behind steel bars with hollow eyes and silent rage. Inside, the air was thick with sweat, rot, and something worse, despair. A man screamed in the distance. Another whispered prayers in a dialect Traoré hadn't heard since childhood. He walked past cells where men had forgotten the sun, where names were replaced by numbers, and dignity was traded for survival. He had ordered reforms. He had promised justice. But rumors had reached him. Rumors of torture chambers hidden behind false walls, of bribes exchanged for silence, of bodies buried without names. He couldn't trust reports. He couldn't trust ministers. So he became the prisoner. A guard laughed as he slammed the cell door shut. "You'll learn respect in here," he sneered. Traoré didn't flinch. He sat on the concrete floor, eyes scanning the cracks, ears tuned to every sound. He wasn't here to survive. He was here to witness. And what he saw in the next hour, the rituals, the punishments, the hierarchy of pain, would shake him to his core. But the real horror hadn't even begun. Before the chains, before the cell, before the silence, Burkina Faso was burning. The streets of Ouagadougou had once echoed with chants of hope, young voices demanding change, elders praying for peace. But beneath the surface, power was shifting like tectonic plates. Ibrahim Traoré, a captain barely in his 30s, had risen from the ranks not with promises, but with purpose. He didn't speak like a politician. He spoke like a soldier who had seen too many graves. The coup was swift. President Damiba was ousted. Traoré stood before the nation, fist clenched, eyes steady, vowing to restore dignity to a country drowning in foreign influence and internal decay. For a moment, the people believed again. But power is a double-edged blade. Whispers began to spread, not in the newspapers, but in the markets, the mosques, the late-night taxis. Men arrested without trial. Families searching for sons who vanished behind prison walls. A mother claimed her child was tortured for speaking out. A former guard leaked a voice note. "They don't ask questions. They just make you disappear." Traoré heard it all. Ministers dismissed the rumors. Advisors urged silence. "It's propaganda," they said. "Focus on the economy." But he couldn't ignore the ache in his chest, the feeling that the revolution he led was being hijacked by shadows. He ordered an internal review. The report came back clean. Too clean. Then came the letter. Anonymous. Handwritten. "If you want the truth, don't send inspectors. Become one." That night, he made the decision. No cameras. No entourage. Just a disguise, a fake arrest, and a plan that could cost him everything. He had to see it with his own eyes. But what he found was far worse than the rumors. And the man behind it all was waiting. His name was Colonel Bako Sanu, but inside the walls of Ouagadougou Central, they called him the Minister of Shadows. To the public, he was a war hero. Decorated. Stoic. A man who had kept order during the country's darkest hours. He wore his medals like armor, his speeches laced with patriotism and warnings about foreign agitators. On state television, he smiled beside diplomats, toasted with generals, and spoke of Burkina Faso's proud march toward stability. But behind the prison gates, his empire told a different story. Sanu didn't run a correctional facility. He ran a kingdom, one built on fear, silence, and profit. The cells were overcrowded, but his mansion on the outskirts of the capital was sprawling. Imported marble floors, South African wine, a private golf course where foreign contractors came to negotiate over cigars and immunity deals. He had connections, French intelligence, Russian mercenaries, Gulf financiers. They didn't care about Burkina Faso's constitution. They cared about access. And Sanu delivered. In exchange, he was untouchable. Inside the prison, his rule was absolute. Guards were handpicked for loyalty, not law. Inmates were currency. Some were tortured for information. Others were sold, disappeared into black sites, or handed over to foreign operatives. Bribes flowed like water. A family could pay to reduce a sentence. A rival could pay to extend one. And if someone spoke out, they vanished. Sanu's cruelty wasn't loud. It was methodical. He kept files on every prisoner, not for justice, but for leverage. He knew who had family abroad, who had debts, who had secrets. He weaponized shame. He broke men slowly, until they begged to forget who they were. And he enjoyed it. There was one story that never made the news. A young activist arrested during a protest. She was 19. She had written a poem about freedom. Sanu had her placed in solitary for 30 days. When she emerged, she couldn't speak. Her mother tried to sue. The case disappeared. The mother did too. Sanu's power didn't come from the law. It came from the silence of those who feared him. And yet, he was celebrated. At military banquets, he was toasted as the backbone of internal security. At international forums, he spoke of African sovereignty while pocketing foreign aid. He was a master of contradiction, a nationalist who sold secrets, a patriot who buried truth. Traoré had heard the rumors. He had seen the reports. But Sanu always had an answer. Fake news, he'd say. Western propaganda. And when Traoré demanded reform, Sanu smiled and said, "Of course, Mr. President. Leave it to me." But Traoré didn't trust smiles anymore. He knew that if the soul of Burkina Faso was rotting, it was rotting from the inside. And Sanu was the infection. So he went undercover. No guards. No cameras. Just chains and silence. And this was the man Traoré would soon face, not as a president, but as a prisoner. He was born in the dust, not of privilege, but of purpose. Ibrahim Traoré didn't inherit power. He earned it, one rank at a time, through discipline, grit, and a refusal to bow. Raised in a modest home in Kara, he watched his mother barter for rice and his father pray for rain. The village taught him humility. The military taught him resolve. He rose quickly, not because he was loud, but because he listened. In the barracks, he was the one who stayed behind to clean rifles others forgot. In the field, he was the one who volunteered for missions others feared. His loyalty wasn't to generals. It was to the men beside him and the country beneath his boots. Then came the chaos. Burkina Faso was crumbling under President Damiba's rule. Foreign troops patrolled local soil. Corruption bloomed in government halls. The people cried out, and no one answered. Traoré watched villages burn while ministers debated. He saw soldiers die while politicians died. And something inside him snapped. The coup wasn't planned in luxury. It was whispered in tents, scribbled on maps, and sealed with blood. On September 30th, 2022, Traoré led a group of young officers to seize control. No fanfare, no applause, just a broadcast. "We have decided to take our responsibilities before history." The world called him a rebel. His people called him a savior. But power is a storm. It doesn't just elevate, it tests. Traoré didn't want palaces. He wanted sovereignty. He spoke of Pan-African unity, of breaking colonial chains, of building a future where Burkina Faso stood tall without begging. He rejected foreign aid with strings. He welcomed African thinkers, not Western consultants. Yet the deeper he went, the more he saw the rot. Old systems didn't vanish with a coup. They adapted. Bureaucrats smiled while sabotaging reforms. Military allies whispered of loyalty while pocketing bribes. And prisons, the very places meant to uphold justice, became factories of fear. Traoré wrestled with the weight of his own revolution. Could he cleanse a system without becoming its tyrant? Could he lead with truth in a world built on lies? He began to doubt, not his mission, but the machinery around it. That's when he made the decision to strip away the title, to walk into the belly of the beast, to see, feel, and suffer what his people endured, not as a president, as a prisoner, because speeches don't reveal truth. Chains do, but ideals mean nothing when you're locked in a cell with killers. The screams weren't distant anymore. They echoed through the concrete like war drums, rhythmic, raw, and deliberate. Traoré sat in his cell, fists clenched, listening to the ritual unfold. A man was being punished, not for violence, not for theft, for speaking out. The guards called it re-education. The inmates called it the hour of breaking. Traoré had seen battlefields. He had seen death. But this was different. This was cruelty without cause, pain as policy. He waited until the shift changed. Then he asked for water. The guard who arrived was lean, sharp-eyed, and smug. "You think you're special?" he sneered. "I think I'm thirsty," Traoré replied, voice calm. The guard laughed. "You'll learn humility here." "I've studied it," Traoré said. in places where men wore medals to hide their shame. The guard froze. The words were too precise, too familiar. Within the hour, Traoré was summoned. The warden's office was colder than the cells. Not in temperature, in tone. Sanu sat behind a desk carved from imported wood, sipping tea like a monarch. He didn't look up. "You speak well for a convict," he said. "I listen well," Traoré replied. Sanu smiled. "Listening is dangerous here. So is silence." The room thickened. Sanu leaned forward. "You know who I am?" "I know what you are." Sanu's eyes narrowed. "Careful. Men disappear for less. Men disappear when truth becomes inconvenient." Sanu stood. "You think you're clever. You think you're brave. But in here, bravery is a liability." Traoré didn't blink. "And outside, cowardice is a currency." The silence was electric. Two guards shifted uneasily. Sanu walked slowly around the desk, stopping inches from Traoré's face. "You're not the first idealist to land here," he whispered. "They all break. Eventually." Traoré met his gaze. "Some bend. Others rebuild." Sanu chuckled. "You'll learn." "I already have." The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Sanu turned away, but his voice was colder now. "Enjoy your stay. It gets darker from here." Traoré returned to his cell. The walls felt closer. The air felt thinner. He had tested the monster, and the monster had smiled. Then came the moment that shattered his illusion of control. The hallway was silent. Not the silence of peace, the silence before a storm. Guards stood at attention, confused. Inmates pressed against their cell bars, sensing something unnatural. Even the air felt heavier, as if holding its breath. Traoré walked slowly, deliberately, toward the warden's office. His sweatshirt was gone. His posture had changed. No longer hunched. No longer hiding. He moved like a man reclaiming his name. Inside, Colonel Sanu sat behind his desk, flanked by two armed guards. He didn't look up. "You again," he muttered. "Didn't I tell you?" "Ibrahim Traoré." The voice cut through the room like a blade. Sanu froze. "Ibrahim Traoré," he repeated louder now. "Captain, head of state, son of Kara, and today, your witness." The guards blinked. One stepped back. The other gripped his rifle tighter. Sanu stood slowly, eyes narrowing. "This is a game," he said. "A trick." Traoré reached into his waistband and pulled out a small device, no larger than a coin. He placed it on the desk. 3 days of recordings," he said. "Every scream, every bribe, every threat, every name." Sanu's face twitched. Traoré turned to the guards. "You've heard the cries. You've seen the beatings. You've followed orders. But today, you choose country or corruption." One guard lowered his weapon. The other didn't move. Traoré stepped forward. "You told me bravery is a liability, but cowardice is a legacy, and I refuse to leave that behind." Sanu laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. "You think this changes anything? You think the world cares?" Traoré didn't flinch. "The world doesn't change because it cares. It changes because someone dares." He pressed a button on the device. A voice crackled to life. A guard demanding payment to release a prisoner. Another voice, Sanu's, mocking a mother who begged for her son's life. The room shifted. Gasps echoed from the hallway. Inmates shouted. Guards whispered. Traoré turned to the window, where the prison yard was visible. "You built this place to break men. But you forgot. Broken men don't stay silent. They rise." Sanu lunged for the device. A guard stopped him. Traoré faced him one last time. "You wore medals to hide your shame. I wore chains to find the truth." Sanu's voice cracked. "You'll regret this." "I already regret trusting you." The door burst open. Journalists flooded in, tipped off by a signal Traoré had sent hours earlier. Cameras rolled. Microphones extended. Traoré stood tall. "This is not just a prison," he said. "It's a mirror. And today, Burkina Faso sees its reflection." He listed names, dates, crimes. He spoke of the activist girl, the tortured father, the missing sons. He called for trials, for transparency, for truth. The crowd outside the gates grew. Citizens, families, survivors. Inside, Sanu was silent. Traoré ended with a whisper, not to the cameras, but to the guards. "Justice isn't loud. It's relentless." And then he walked out. But the fallout would reach far beyond these prison walls. The footage hit the internet like a lightning strike. Within hours, clips of Traoré's confrontation with Colonel Sanu flooded social media. the audio recordings, the speech. The moment he revealed his identity. It was all there, raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. Chains of truth began trending across West Africa. TikTok users reenacted the scene. Instagram flooded with artwork of Traoré in handcuffs, eyes blazing. Twitter was ablaze with debates, praise, and fury. Some called him a visionary. Others called him reckless. But no one was silent. In Ouagadougou, thousands gathered outside the prison gates, chanting his name. Mothers held up photos of missing sons. Students waved flags stitched with the word justice. The air pulsed with something rare, belief. International media scrambled to catch up. Al Jazeera ran a special titled The President Who Became a Prisoner. CNN called it Africa's most daring political stunt. France 24 questioned the legality. Russia Today praised the courage. The world watched, divided but captivated. Celebrities weighed in. A Nigerian pop star tweeted, "Traoré just redefined leadership." A Burkinabe poet posted, "He wore our pain like armor." Even a Hollywood actor shared the clip, captioned, "This is what power should look like." But not everyone cheered. Opposition figures accused Traoré of theatrics. This was a distraction, one said. A dictator playing hero. Foreign diplomats expressed concern. Unorthodox, they called it. Destabilizing. Some questioned the authenticity of the recordings. Others feared retaliation. Inside the government, tensions rose. Ministers who had once smiled beside Traoré now whispered in corridors. Was this a warning? A purge? A declaration? And yet, the people didn't flinch. They rallied. They marched. They demanded trials, transparency, and reform. The prison system was no longer a shadow, it was a spotlight. And Sanu? He was nowhere to be found. Memes exploded. One showed Traoré dropping the recording device like a mic. Another depicted Sanu hiding behind his medals. Satirical cartoons flooded WhatsApp groups. The nation laughed, cried, and questioned, all at once. But Traoré remained silent. No press conference. No follow-up speech. Just silence. Until the next morning. A single post appeared on his official account. No caption. Just a photo, the prison gates wide open. And just when the world thought it was over, Traoré made one final move. The screen flickered. Across Burkina Faso, in cafes, classrooms, and crowded living rooms, people leaned in. The man who had walked into prison in chains now stood behind a podium, flanked by no guards, no generals, no flags. Just silence. And truth. Ibrahim Traoré looked directly into the camera. "I did not go to that prison to perform," he began. "I went to remember." He paused. To remember what power feels like when you're on the receiving end of it. To remember the faces of those we forget. To remember that justice, real justice, is not a slogan. It's a sacrifice. The nation held its breath. He didn't deflect. He didn't deny. He named the failures, the silence, the complicity. He spoke of Sanu's empire, of the guards who obeyed out of fear, of the ministers who looked away. He spoke of the girl who lost her voice, the father who lost his son, the country that nearly lost its soul. "I am not proud of what I found," he said, "but I am proud that we now know." Then came the promises. Effective immediately, the prison system would be dismantled and rebuilt, not with concrete, but with conscience. Every inmate's case would be reviewed, every guard retrained, every warden held accountable. No exceptions. He announced the formation of a Truth and Dignity Commission, led by independent voices, journalists, activists, survivors. Global observers were invited. No red tape. No censorship. "We will not hide behind sovereignty to shield injustice," he said. "We will lead with it." The speech wasn't fiery. It was firm, measured, human. He spoke of unity, not the kind forced by flags, but the kind forged in pain. He called on citizens to speak, to organize, to hold him accountable. He asked for forgiveness, not for the coup, but for the silence that followed. "I wore the uniform of a soldier," he said, "but I forgot the weight of a citizen's chains." The final minutes were quiet. He looked into the lens, eyes steady. "We are not defined by our darkness," he said. "We are defined by what we do when we face it." Then, the crescendo. "Justice isn't a slogan. It's a sacrifice, and I am ready to make mine." The screen faded to black. Outside, the country didn't erupt. It exhaled. People cried, hugged, prayed. Some lit candles. Others wrote poems. A group of students painted murals of Traoré, not as a president, but as a prisoner who chose truth. The world watched. And for once, it didn't just comment. It listened, because in a time of noise, one man had chosen silence and filled it with courage. He disguised himself as a prisoner, and what he witnessed shook him to his core. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't just walk into the shadows. He dragged the truth into the light. From handcuffs to headlines, his journey wasn't about spectacle. It was about sacrifice, about showing that real leadership isn't measured by titles, but by the courage to confront the rot within. This wasn't just a story about one man. It was a mirror held up to power, to silence, to complicity. And in that reflection, millions saw themselves, their pain, their dignity, their demand for justice. Traoré reminded us that chains don't always come in metal. Sometimes they come in silence. And breaking them requires more than outrage. It requires action. So now, the question isn't what he saw. It's what we do next. If this story moved you, subscribe, share, and speak out. Because silence is complicity. And somewhere, in a cell still echoing with forgotten voices, someone is waiting for us to make noise.